June 23, 1944, 0847 hours. Cave Complex, Northern Saipan. Private First Class Satoshi Kameda pressed his back against the limestone wall, listening to American voices echoing through the tunnel. His rifle was empty. His water had run out 2 days ago. The sergeant beside him was dead, a chunk of shrapnel having opened his skull during the last artillery barrage. Outside, the sound of tank treads grew closer. Kameda was supposed to die here. Every manual, every lecture, every whispered conversation with veterans had made that clear. Capture meant dishonor worse than death itself. Better to pull the pin on a grenade and take some Americans with you. But when the GIs appeared at the cave mouth, carbines raised, calling, "Come out! Hands up!" Kameda found himself walking toward them, arms raised, still breathing. This wasn't the captivity they had been taught to fear. For Japanese prisoners of war, American camps would replace nightmares of torture with routines of work, baseball games, and Hollywood movies, creating a paradox that challenged everything they believed about both the enemy and themselves. The island of no return. The Battle of Saipan had been a catastrophe for Japanese forces. Of the 30,000 defenders, fewer than 1,000 would survive to see the war's end. Most died in suicidal banzai charges or threw themselves from cliffs rather than face capture. The Americans called it rabbit hunting, tracking down the scattered survivors, hiding in caves and jungle ravines. For those few who did surrender, the first shock was simply staying alive. Propaganda had painted Americans as demons who tortured prisoners for sport, who showed no mercy to the subhuman Japanese race. Instead, Kameda found himself receiving medical attention from a Navy corpsman who cleaned his infected wounds and gave him water from his own canteen. "Take it easy, buddy," the medic said in broken Japanese, learned from a phrasebook. "You're safe now." Safe. The word didn't compute. Prisoners weren't supposed to be safe. They were supposed to be dead. The long journey to understanding. The journey from capture to comprehension would take months and span thousands of miles. From Saipan, prisoners were shipped to temporary stockades in Guam and Hawaii, then loaded aboard converted troop transports for the voyage to mainland America. Many had never seen the ocean from this perspective, as passengers rather than invaders. On the USS General John Pope, carrying 847 Japanese prisoners toward California in August 1944, the contradictions began immediately. These men had been fed a steady diet of propaganda about American weakness and cruelty. Instead, they found themselves sleeping in bunks with mattresses, eating 3 meals daily from the ship's galley, and receiving medical care that exceeded what many had known as free men in Japan. Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto, a veteran of the China campaign captured on Guam, kept a secret diary throughout the voyage. "The Americans feed us better than our own army did," he wrote. "Rice, meat, vegetables, even fruit. The guards play cards with us. Some speak a little Japanese. Where is the cruelty we were promised?" The mathematics of unexpected comfort. The scale of American POW operations in 1944 to 1945 revealed a logistical capability that Japanese prisoners found incomprehensible. By war's end, approximately 5,400 Japanese prisoners were held in American camps, primarily at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and Angel Island, California. Each facility featured heated barracks, mess halls serving 3,000 calories daily per prisoner, medical facilities staffed by qualified doctors, recreation areas including baseball diamonds and volleyball courts, workshop spaces for craft projects and basic industry, and projection rooms for regular movie screenings. The Japanese military's own POW facilities, by contrast, operated on starvation rations of 600, 800 calories daily, with survival rates that horrified Allied investigators. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was a mathematical demonstration of two entirely different philosophies of warfare and human worth. Weekly recreational schedule at Camp McCoy included baseball games every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, movie screenings Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings, arts and crafts workshops on weekends, and organized sports tournaments monthly. These weren't propaganda gestures or special treatments. They were standard operating procedures mandated by American interpretation of the Geneva Convention. First contact with America. The train journey from the West Coast to Camp McCoy provided Japanese prisoners with their first sustained glimpse of American abundance. Through the windows of passenger cars, not cattle cars, but actual Pullman coaches, they watched a continental landscape that defied their understanding of wartime sacrifice. Electric lights blazed from every farmhouse. Automobiles crowded the roads. Cities sprawled beyond the horizon, their factories smoking with productive capacity. This was a nation supposedly brought to its knees by Japanese victories in 1941 to 1942. Instead, they witnessed an industrial machine operating at full capacity while simultaneously fighting wars on two fronts. "We saw no evidence of shortages," testified Corporal Hiroshi Tanaka in post-war interviews. "No darkened windows, no empty fields, no starving civilians. Every station platform was crowded with people who looked well-fed and prosperous. How could this be a country at war?" At fuel stops, American guards sometimes allowed prisoners to disembark and stretch their legs. Local civilians gathered to stare at the enemy soldiers they'd only seen in newsreels. But instead of hatred, many showed curiosity, even sympathy. Children offered candy through the windows. Women from church groups provided sandwiches and coffee. This kindness from enemy civilians violated every assumption about American character that Japanese military training had instilled. The Wisconsin Welcome. Camp McCoy sprawled across 60,000 acres of Wisconsin countryside, a temporary city housing not just Japanese prisoners, but German and Italian POW as well. The facility's organization astounded the new arrivals. Electric lights, running water, flush toilets, and central heating systems that kept barracks comfortable even during brutal Midwest winters. Captain Robert Daniels, the camp's commanding officer, was a career soldier who'd fought in the Pacific before being assigned stateside duty. His approach to prisoner management was pragmatic. "These men are no longer our enemies," he told his staff. "They're our responsibility. We follow the Geneva Convention to the letter, not because we have to, but because that's who we are." Tartu. The initial processing revealed the psychological damage that surrender had inflicted on the prisoners. Many expected immediate execution. Others seemed catatonic, unable to process survival after months of preparing for death. Medical examinations showed widespread malnutrition, untreated tropical diseases, and evidence of severe combat stress. Dr. William Harrison, the camp's chief medical officer, noted in his reports, "These men aren't just physically broken, they're spiritually shattered. Surrender has violated their fundamental worldview. They literally don't know how to exist as prisoners because their culture taught them it was impossible." So, the baseball revelation? The first baseball game at Camp McCoy took place on a crisp October afternoon in 1944. American guards had marked out a diamond on one of the recreational fields, dragging bases into position and setting up a backstop behind home plate. Most of the Japanese prisoners watched from a distance, uncertain whether participation would constitute collaboration with the enemy. Baseball wasn't unknown in Japan. The sport had been introduced in the 1870s and had gained popularity before the war. But playing it with enemy soldiers while held captive raised complex questions about honor, loyalty, and survival. Private Satoshi Kameda was among the first to approach the field. At 19, he'd played baseball in high school before being drafted. The familiar weight of a wooden bat in his hands triggered memories of summer afternoons in Kyoto, before the war had consumed everything. "Autry, you know this game?" asked Corporal Frank Morales, a Mexican-American guard from Los Angeles who'd grown up playing in East LA leagues. Kameda nodded hesitantly. Morales tossed him a baseball. "Show me your swing." The crack of the bat carried across the compound, drawing prisoners from their barracks. Some watched with disapproval. Sergeant Yamamoto stood with arms folded, his face a mask of disgust. Others edged closer, drawn by curiosity and half-remembered joy. Within weeks, regular games were being organized. Japanese prisoners formed teams, adopting names like the Saipan Tigers and Guam Eagles, references to their capture locations, worn now as badges of survival rather than shame. They played against each other and occasionally against mixed teams of guards and German prisoners. The psychological impact was profound. For men who had been taught that capture meant the end of human dignity, the simple act of running bases and catching fly balls represented a kind of resurrection. They were still alive, still capable of joy, still fundamentally human despite their circumstances. Movie night transformations. The weekly film screenings began in November 1944, projected onto a bedsheet stretched across one wall of the mess hall. The first movie was a Mickey Mouse cartoon, followed by a newsreel and a Western starring John Wayne. The response from the prisoners ranged from bewilderment to fascination to outright hostility. Sergeant Yamamoto walked out during the cartoon, declaring it enemy propaganda designed to weaken our resolve. But younger prisoners found themselves laughing despite their circumstances. The universal language of slapstick comedy transcended cultural barriers and political loyalties. Lieutenant Hiroshi Matsuda, a former university student captured on Okinawa, kept detailed notes on the films. They show us their own movies, comedies, adventures, romances. Nothing about the war, nothing about Japanese defeats. It's as if they want us to see America as it sees itself. A place of abundance and entertainment, where even prisoners can laugh. The movie selections revealed something profound about American character. These weren't propaganda films designed to break enemy morale. They were ordinary Hollywood entertainment. The same movies playing in theaters across America. The guards watched alongside the prisoners, sharing popcorn and commentary, treating movie night as communal recreation rather than psychological warfare. Over the months, certain films became prisoner favorites. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator drew nervous laughter for its satire of authoritarianism. Buster Keaton comedies needed no translation. Even Westerns, with their themes of honor and violence, resonated with samurai-influenced Japanese culture. The most popular film was The Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig biography. Baseball provided common ground, but the story's themes of dignity and defeat and grace under pressure spoke to prisoners wrestling with their own circumstances. Cultural resistance and gradual acceptance. Not all prisoners embraced their circumstances. A faction led by Sergeant Yamamoto maintained strict military discipline, refusing to participate in recreational activities and viewing any enjoyment as betrayal of fallen comrades. They enforced their own code of conduct through social pressure and occasional violence. "We are still soldiers of the Emperor," Yamamoto declared during heated discussions in the barracks. "These games and movies are designed to make us forget our duty, to transform us into willing slaves of the enemy." The generational divide was stark. Older prisoners, steeped in Bushido tradition and military indoctrination, struggled to adapt to circumstances that contradicted everything they'd been taught. Younger men, particularly those drafted from civilian life, proved more flexible in their thinking. Private Kameda found himself caught between worlds. His respect for hierarchy demanded deference to Yamamoto's authority, but his growing friendship with American guards and fellow prisoners offered an alternative model of behavior. The internal conflict manifested in sleepless nights and loss of appetite that concerned medical staff. The breakthrough came during a softball game in April 1945. Yamamoto, walking past the field, stopped to watch a close play at home plate. The runner, a young prisoner from his own prefecture, was called safe by the American umpire despite what appeared to be a close play. Instead of arguing, the catcher accepted the call and helped the runner dust off his uniform. For a moment, Yamamoto's mask slipped. Here was his countryman showing the kind of grace and sportsmanship that Bushido claimed to value. But in circumstances that traditional military thinking couldn't accommodate. That evening, Yamamoto approached Camp Commandant Daniels through an interpreter. "I request permission to observe your baseball instruction." The Nisei Bridge. The presence of Japanese-American soldiers serving as interpreters added another layer of complexity to camp dynamics. Men like Staff Sergeant Kenji Nakamura of the Military Intelligence Service found themselves mediating between cultures they understood intimately, but belonged to in different ways. Nakamura had grown up in Los Angeles, playing baseball in Nisei leagues before the war. His family had been interned at Manzanar while he served with distinction in the Pacific Theater. His fluent Japanese and understanding of American culture made him invaluable in managing prisoner relations. "I'm your enemy twice over," he told a group of prisoners during an orientation session. "I'm American, and I'm Japanese American, but I'm also the guy who's going to help you understand the rules here and help the Americans understand you." The prisoners' reactions to Nakamura revealed deep complexities in Japanese racial and national identity. Some viewed him as a traitor who had abandoned his ancestral homeland for American convenience. Others saw him as proof that Japanese people could thrive in American society. Nakamura's approach was pragmatic. "You can hate me if it makes you feel better, but I'm going to teach you how to survive here with dignity." That starts with understanding that the Americans mean what they say about following the Geneva Convention. His baseball skills provided common ground. During practice sessions, he demonstrated techniques and strategies that impressed even reluctant participants. More importantly, he showed that maintaining Japanese identity didn't require rejecting all American influences. Spring training, 1945. The arrival of spring in Wisconsin brought expanded recreational programs. The baseball season began in earnest, with organized leagues forming among the different prisoner populations. The quality of play improved dramatically as more experienced players emerged from the ranks and equipment became available. The American guards, initially skeptical of fraternizing with enemy prisoners, found themselves drawn into the competition. Informal games between guards and prisoners became regular events, with betting pools and heated discussions of strategy transcending language barriers. Corporal Morales later recalled, "These guys weren't our enemies anymore. They were just guys who loved baseball. We'd argue about batting stances and pitching grips like we were back in the neighborhood, not in a prison camp." The transformation was visible in prisoner behavior. Men who had arrived sullen and withdrawn began showing personality and humor. They argued with umpires, celebrated good plays, and commiserated over errors with the passion of athletes everywhere. Medical reports noted significant improvements in mental health among prisoners who participated in recreational activities. Dr. Harrison documented reduced instances of depression, anxiety, and what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. "Physical activity and social interaction are proving more effective than any medication we have," he wrote. "These men are remembering how to be human again." The news from home, radio broadcasts, and newspaper reports filtered into the camp throughout 1945, bringing updates on the war's progress. The fall of Iwo Jima, the devastating bombing campaigns against Japanese cities, and the invasion of Okinawa painted a picture of steadily mounting catastrophe for the homeland. The prisoners' reactions varied dramatically. Some retreated into denial, insisting that American reports were fabricated propaganda. Others sank into despair as they contemplated the destruction of everything they'd known. A few began openly discussing the possibility that Japan might be forced to surrender. During a baseball game in July 1945, news arrived that B-29s had conducted massive raids against Tokyo, Osaka, and other major cities. Play stopped as prisoners gathered around radios, listening to descriptions of firebombing campaigns that had reduced vast urban areas to ash. Lieutenant Matsuda sat on the pitcher's mound, his head in his hands. "My family lives in Tokyo," he whispered to Nakamura. "Lived in Tokyo. I don't even know if they're still alive." The war that had once seemed distant and abstract suddenly felt immediate and personal. These men were not just prisoners. They were exiles from a homeland that might no longer exist when the war ended. August 15th, the Emperor's Voice. The announcement of Japan's surrender came over the camp's public address system at 1100 hours on August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's radio broadcast, transmitted live from Tokyo, reached every corner of Camp McCoy through speakers that had previously carried baseball game announcements and movie schedules. The prisoners' reactions defied easy categorization. Some wept openly, mourning not just military defeat, but the collapse of a worldview that had defined their existence. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process the reality of surrender. A few seemed almost relieved. The burden of fighting for a lost cause had finally been lifted. Sergeant Yamamoto, the most rigid defender of military discipline, was found later that evening sitting alone on the baseball field, staring at the pitcher's mound where he'd finally learned to throw a curveball. When Nakamura approached, Yamamoto spoke without looking up. "For 3 years, I told these boys that death was preferable to surrender. That capture meant dishonor, worse than extinction. Now the emperor himself has surrendered. What do I tell them now?" The question hung in the air like incense in a destroyed temple, sacred assumptions reduced to ash by the weight of undeniable reality. The repatriation process. The process of returning Japanese prisoners to their homeland began in late 1945 and continued through 1946. Many faced the prospect of repatriation with mixed emotions, eagerness to see family and homeland, tempered by uncertainty about what they would find. The America they were leaving behind had challenged every assumption about enemy character and democratic weakness. They had experienced abundance in captivity that exceeded their freedom in wartime Japan. They had witnessed kindness from people they'd been taught to hate. They had rediscovered joy in circumstances designed to produce despair. Private Kameda, preparing for departure in December 1945, wrote a letter to Corporal Morales. "You taught me that enemies can become friends, that baseball is the same everywhere, that laughter translates all languages. When I return to Japan, I will remember that Americans are not demons, but people who love their families and their games, just as we do." The physical evidence of their transformation was unmistakable. Prisoners had gained weight, recovered from tropical diseases, and developed skills in crafts and trades that would serve them in post-war reconstruction. More importantly, they carried mental images that contradicted years of military indoctrination. Many took home American-made baseball gloves, gifts from guards who had become friends. Others carried photographs of movie stars whose films had provided escape from the reality of captives. Were encouraged to play with Japanese teams, fostering the kind of casual interaction that had proven so effective in POW camps. By 1950, professional baseball had been re-established in Japan, with many teams adopting playing styles and strategies learned by former prisoners in American camps. The sport became a symbol of peaceful competition and international friendship, values that seemed impossible during the brutal Pacific War. Reflections on captivity. In interviews conducted decades after the war, former Japanese prisoners consistently identified their time in American camps as transformative experiences that challenged their fundamental understanding of enemy character and democratic values. "We expected Americans to be weak because they showed mercy," reflected Kameda in a 1985 interview. "Instead, we discovered that mercy requires strength, the strength to treat enemies as human beings, even when you have every reason to hate them." The contrast with Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners was too stark to ignore. American POWs in Japanese camps faced systematic brutality, starvation rations, and survival rates that horrified post-war investigators. The difference wasn't just in resources. It reflected fundamentally different philosophies about human worth and the conduct of warfare. Former prisoners became unwitting ambassadors for democratic values in post-war Japan. Their testimony about American treatment provided credible counter-narratives to militaristic propaganda that had portrayed the enemy as subhuman. Their experiences laid groundwork for the peaceful relationship that would develop between former enemies. The paradox resolved. The paradox that had confronted Japanese prisoners, receiving kindness from enemies they'd been taught to hate, ultimately revealed deeper truths about the nature of strength and civilization. The America they encountered in captivity was powerful enough to show mercy, prosperous enough to share abundance, and confident enough in its values to extend humanity even to defeated foes. This wasn't weakness disguised as strength, but strength confident enough to express itself through generosity rather than cruelty. The baseball games and movie nights weren't propaganda tools designed to break enemy morale. They were expressions of American character that valued human dignity even in captivity. All carried memories of treatment that had preserved their dignity even in defeat. Return to a shattered world. The Japan that greeted returning prisoners bore little resemblance to the homeland they'd left. Cities lay in ruins. The economy had collapsed, and millions faced starvation during the harsh winter of 1945 to 1946. The contrast with the abundance they'd witnessed in American captivity was stark and disturbing. former Lieutenant Matsuda found his family among the homeless refugees camping in Tokyo's ruins. His parents had survived the firebombing, but their neighborhood had been completely destroyed. The small electronics shop his father had operated was nothing but rubble and twisted metal. "Tell us about America," his father asked during their first evening together in almost 2 years. "Were they cruel to you? Did they torture you for information?" Matsuda struggled to find words that would convey the truth without seeming like a traitor to his own country. How could he explain baseball games while Japanese civilians starved? How could he describe movie nights while his family had huddled in bomb shelters? "They fed us," he said finally. "They gave us medicine when we were sick. They taught us their games and showed us their movies. They treated us like human beings, even though we were their enemies." His father's silence spoke volumes. In a Japan where military honor had demanded death before dishonor, the concept of honorable captivity challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare and sacrifice. The baseball legacy. Many returning prisoners found ways to share their love of baseball with a homeland desperate for any form of hope and entertainment. Despite initial resistance from authorities who viewed the sport as foreign contamination, baseball began appearing in schools and neighborhoods throughout occupied Japan. Former Camp McCoy prisoners organized informal leagues, teaching American rules and techniques to Japanese children who had known only war and destruction. The sport provided a bridge between the traumatic past and an uncertain future, a source of joy that transcended political ideology. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding the occupation forces, recognized baseball's potential as a democratizing influence. American troops. Wartime. For prisoners who had been conditioned to view surrender as the ultimate dishonor, discovering that captivity could preserve rather than destroy their humanity represented a philosophical revolution. They learned that survival without honor was possible, that enemies could become friends, and that some victories were achieved through kindness rather than conquest. The crack of the bat and flicker of the movie projector echoed through their memories long after repatriation, serving as reminders that even in war's darkest hours, humanity could prevail over hatred, mercy could triumph over vengeance, and former enemies could find common ground on a baseball diamond under Wisconsin stars.